Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook, the CEO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our HCMx Radio podcast. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to warmly welcome Stephen Paskoff, the President and CEO of ELI. Hi, Stephen, how are you?
Rachel, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again for joining with me today, and thank you all for listening in. We have an interesting topic to discuss. We're going to be talking about inclusion, diversity, and equity, the differentiation and the meaning, and how to really, what are some of the things that we need to think about what's happening in today's environment. And Stephen, of all people, has an extensive history, and I'd like for you to actually share a little bit about your background and why you're a resident on this subject. And I think you're going to bring a lot of interesting perspectives to our listeners today. Stephen, can you talk a little bit about your background before we go into our topic for today?
Rachel, I believe in civil rights and equal employment opportunity and have my entire professional career. I was an investigator for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission when I was in law school. When I graduated, I became a regional trial attorney, part of a group based in the Southeast, living in Atlanta, where I had responsibilities for investigating, litigating individual and pattern and practice claims of discrimination. I left the government, joined a private law firm where I counseled clients, advised them, and represented them in a range of equal employment, affirmative action related matters. And what happened over my career, I was there from 76 till 86, last four as a partner, was that I started seeing that there were issues of discrimination that could have been readily avoided. They were based on behaviors, but the way learning was taught was inefficient. Lawyers like me would go in and bore people to death talking about the law and not ever focusing on core behaviors that crossed all the statutes that define the basic problems. I thought, I love to teach, I'm going to do this, and I started Employment Learning Innovations, ELI, named after my son's middle name. His first is John. And the whole idea was to help clients operate professionally and legally and in a non-discriminatory way. Our mission has changed or evolved. And now when I look at it 35 years later, yes, our core elements include non-discrimination and non-harassment, but we're trying to help organizations build not only diverse, but inclusive, equitable, fair work environments to generate the best results. Just broadly, we work all over the country and internationally and have had some astonishing experiences teaching and helping to change workplace cultures and standards.
Thank you. Thanks for giving us some context and sharing about your background. So where do you see, and you spent your whole career in defending civil rights and in writing about it and from a law standpoint of view. Where do you see it? How has it evolved today? And what do you see that's changing or maybe not changing?
There's been a lot of progress in terms of realizing what I see, in my own words, a civil rights vision, which is a workplace. And I want to speak specifically about the workplace where people are evaluated, hired, brought in based on their merits and skills and capabilities, and they're actually included in the workplace as productive team members where they're given the opportunity to do their best work and work cooperatively and collaboratively with others. And the whole idea is, as my work's evolved, is to get organizations to see that, yes, there's a legal element to this, and there is. More to the point, it's related to performance and results, getting the best talent, and then utilizing that talent, advancing them, giving them the opportunities to produce the best results.
Right. And where do you see, though, there's so much has happened, especially over these past couple of years, that even there's always issues, right? But even more so in a pandemic, everything is kind of coming to a head here. Everything is hypersensitive. All the issues are rising to the top. Where do you see, how do you see some companies falling short in being able to address these issues effectively, and what should they do about it?
I think many organizations are trying to improve, to have a diverse workplace, which means having people, the best talent you can find from the wide array of peoples who are available. And there's an awful lot of talk about the commitment to equity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But what I see as an issue is taking that aspiration and converting it to daily behavior, which changes habits, the way people work together. When those topics are treated as isolated subjects, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're not related to other topics derived from an organization's mission, vision, and values, they are subjects that aren't integrated the same way as other subjects are. And to me, that is causing frustration in the field, and it's minimizing the opportunity for lasting, enduring cultural roots.
And you have a model that you've created that kind of helps companies figure this out, or in essence, change some of those habits so that the culture changes, the mindset changes. Can you talk a bit about that model?
Rachel, the model, it seems to me, has got to start off with the idea that if you want to bring in people from a wide array of backgrounds, you've got to do it in a way that unifies the workplace rather than divides. A unifier for an organization's citizens, employees who join the organization, should be that they are all subject to the same commitment to the organization's mission, vision, and values, and that should be treated as core elements linked to diversity, equity, inclusion, and other key initiatives, and it should lead to a standard type of behavior in terms of how people are treated that apply as principles, in my view, of organizational citizenship. Everyone should share in those values and standards, and that is the place where you can better understand differences. But the organizational commonalities are critical for bringing people together, and I believe that's where you've got to start. One other point, if I can, is not everyone gets this, and there are folks who don't understand it or are prone to, as we'll talk about, resist it. But what you can use to bring them together is to get them to see, don't we all share a commitment to values, mission, and vision? Don't we all want to have the best results? Don't we all want to work according to the same rules? Then here's how we go through that to get the best results. If they can see this as an element of culture and values and mission, as I mentioned, that affects them and helps them and their teams be more successful, it's a more positive way to start and bring people together from our experience.
So can you give me an example? What does that look like? If, like, with one of your clients,
yes.
How does that
work? Let me see if I can tell you of an experience that is 2 days old with an arm of the United States government that is responsible in part for preventing threats that involve chemical, nuclear, biological, and other forms of hazards. What they have to do is find out about issues and prevent them. It involves getting them to see people from a wide array of backgrounds who actually work together and talk about what they're seeing, which has cultural elements and insights that you have to have. For them, the approach was to get folks to see, wait a minute, this is how we work together to reduce those threats. What could be more important than having the right folks whose talents and skills we can actually use to meet our mission for the whole American citizenry and broader. So that's the best example I could give you. It's 2 days old to get folks saying we have people, they may be different, but they're united in mission, but they have to be able to express their views, treated as colleagues to fully speak up and benefit from all they can bring to our workplace. That can be used in other organizations. We've used it in healthcare, we've used it in nuclear power, we've used it in government, and we have used it all over. That's the whole point.
So basically, you're bringing together these different diverse leaders or team members to really kind of come together to identify what their mission is and how that mission aligns to the vision and the objectives of the organization. And in doing so, you're creating that, the standard of language or the standard of expectations, but also kind of, you have to embrace each other's differences. And also, I feel that by doing this and bringing people together, you're learning a lot along the way. And, and I'm sure it's not as easy as it sounds. I know the work that we do with organizations, it's not as simple. You do this and you're going to have the most inclusive culture. It's really something that has to be it has to be institutionalized and part of everything else that you do. It has to be part of the fabric, right? It's not, we work with Eli and then tomorrow we're fantastic. They really have to, how do you get them to commit? Like, how do you get them to
That's a wonderful question. A couple of things. You talked about an aspirational workplace to get people to work together. The key is to get them to recognize that this is all tied to results. That's step one. Second, you have to have principles of behavior that involve two areas from our experience. One area is you've got to set some standards if you're a leader or an employee about the things you do and you don't do. It's basic that there are certain kinds of behaviors that you don't engage in, things you don't say. Now, when we say you don't say them, it means you don't do them on Zoom or another platform. You don't do them in telephone calls or in meetings, email, text, whatever. So there's a broad array of communications. We've got to be careful about what you write and what you say. There are other steps like knowing when to get help and listening. And another aspect is you've got to have a culture where people are willing to speak up about their differences. You can never know if you're a leader and an employee, no matter how bright, skilled, and committed you are, you'll never know every culture permutation that's out there. But you want to have an environment where people will feel free to speak up, and then you talk and work things through and ideally move on. But there has to be a consistent model of behavior that applies to raising issues, talking about things, and the standard of conduct that incidentally is something that's applied to equal employment opportunity, which is closely interlinked to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are not separate, and too often they are treated as if they are, and also applies to civility, respect, building a welcoming environment, and other kinds of organizational initiatives. That's got to be something that is embedded in the organization. Now, the next question you asked, and tell me if I'm talking too much, is what's the process for this? You just don't come in and do it. The thing we talk about, some organizations are thinking we are going to do it. They say we're going to take a journey, and then our phrase to them is, you say you're going to take a journey, but you're going to do a one-time training and be done. You're talking about a day trip, not a journey. It's very short, and this is extended. So I can give you what we call the C5, it's C to the fifth power for exponential change. I can tell you the core model. Would that be useful?
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
5 core elements. They're easy to say. They take practice, commitment, and one of them is commitment to change culture. The first is leadership commitment. Leadership commitment means leaders first at the top, then at all levels, and ultimately employees or leaders too, have got to say We understand this is important. This is not once and done. This is an enduring change that will make us better, help us get better results in line with our values, mission, and vision. Leaders have got to commit to it, and that doesn't mean sending out a once-a-year message and a great video from the CEO, whomever he or she is. It's got to be something that is stated, talked about, brought up, and it's got to be something that's just not a corporate publication. Second, and related to that, is communication. In communications, you've got to talk about this commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in workaday meetings. It's not something that is just once every 6 weeks we talk about it. Leaders talk about sales and quality and professionalism, excellence, standards, and safety. Comments about core ingredients of that, diversity, equity, inclusion for results, as I mentioned, have got to be brought up too. Training's important. Policies and rules are important. That's content. You've got to have it. It's important. It's not sufficient to make enduring change. The two other elements, consequences. If this is really important and folks treat each other in a way that expresses your values to get those best results, you can recognize with awards, compensation, performance, et cetera, outstanding performance, all the way to dealing with people whose behavior doesn't meet up to your standards. And if you don't enforce those standards, you're saying they don't apply, or they apply only in limited situations. And the last is continuity. This is not something you said, we did a great job in 2021, we're done. The question I'll ask organizations that have sales, let's say you surpass your sales goal in 2021, is the CEO going to say 2022? No standards, we're fine. Absolutely not. This is the same thing. It's got to be as continuous as safety, quality, and other initiatives.
Yeah, you made some really good points. I like that you clarified the differentiation between equity and inclusion and diversity, because I think, I think people still don't quite get the difference between what it means to be inclusive versus what does it truly mean to be, where someone has fair equity or access or ability to, being part of or being a leader or equity and pay in a number of other variables. So I think that's a really good point. All your points made were very good. The key thing is to embed this as part of your talent and people and business imperative. It can't be separate. It can't be a one-time thing or one time a year. We see companies that have continued success or that has a brand for equality and diversity. They've been working on this for years. It's not something they just started these past couple of years when things started to bubble to the surface. They had in place objectives. They had in place leaders that headed up diversity and inclusion, the function. It was they had a seat at the table, so it was driven from leadership and embedded in their fiber. So those companies, and you probably know who some of them are, they continue to even more focus on these past couple of years, but they're it's nothing new for them. They're just trying to reinforce what they've done and trying to introduce new ways of development and new ways of understanding some of the challenges and how to take action. So, and then I feel that there's a lot of opportunity for companies that have not necessarily had the best strategy in place or hadn't had the resources or the buy-in or the support to really focus on this as a strategic imperative.
I think that the last point you made is really important, Rachel, is they haven't maybe had the commitment, because I don't think too often enough that organizations link to results in their own workplaces. Mm-hmm. They don't tell stories enough about the benefits that they've had and some of the issues that can arise when they haven't had inclusive workplaces, and they don't talk about real life examples, as I mentioned. They might talk about abstract statistics. That's great, but I'd ask them to remember that stories stick better than stats. If you can tell a story how someone in your organization was able to speak up and was able to present a point of view that you might not have heard, that made a difference in results, that is what's remembered. And every organization has them.
Yeah, it's the stories are fascinating. I always love when I interview people, or when we have people join our conference. I'm like, please start with a story, because I think it'll be so much more meaningful and it'll be more memorable, than just, like you said, reinforcing what the obvious is, what the challenges are. That's important. I think, there's a reason to have that data and to have transparency, but then you have to have more meaning and more relevancy to what, how does that translate to what's in it for me, or how is this going to benefit the organization, or how hasn't it benefit, people in the organization. So I think that's really telling, and something that we need to think about in why we're doing this, and how do we get that support and that commitment. There was another point too. If you look back, the last recession that we were in, from a research standpoint, I remember interviewing organizations, whether they were in HR or learning, and so many people that I was connecting with, especially in diversity, that function practically disappeared. There were so many people that were laid off that had titles of diversity, whether they were very small departments too. They weren't large departments to begin with, but they were one of the first positions, if they had to start to let go people, in large organizations. So that wasn't really a priority back, I would say, what was that, like 10, 15 years ago, when we started, when we were in that recession. So it is different now. I would say the headline is different. The tone and the feeling towards where we're headed is different. If you talk to any organization right now, I would say they are committed, or trying to figure out, or trying to improve what they already have to some degree. So that's optimistic.
It is optimistic, and I'll make a cautionary note, if I may, on that. The cautionary note is that there is a need for diversity, focus, and professionals who have a unique point of view. And if you eliminate that, it does affect your commitment and the effectiveness of what you're doing. And there is something else that's often overlooked, whether there's a recession or not, and that is delegating back to rank and file, if I can use that term, leaders and team members, the responsibilities for this through their daily behavior, conversation, awareness, and recognition. Let me give you an example. In a nuclear power plant, in healthcare, there are safety conversations all the time. And when I go in and talk to them, I'll ask them, how much do you budget to have those conversations every day? And the answer is zero. It's not a budgeted item to say, Rachel, let's talk about safety for a minute, as utilities do and healthcare does in surgery. The point is, you've got to make that a cultural element. That's where the work needs to be done to get people thinking about it in their daily operational lives. That's where real inclusion exists, or it's minimized.
Right. I'm sure you read the book Outliers, and the segment or the chapter where they talk about what was it, South America and the US pilots. They compared, why there were more accidents in South America, and I think also in Asia, is based on the way that the culture. So what was acceptable in the US for communication between a pilot and a co-pilot has the ability to ask questions, and therefore in certain situations where there's bad weather or there's judgment calls, if there was any uncertainty, the co-pilots had almost equal ability to kind of mitigate that risk or change it, where in certain cultures, and again, this is about culture and understanding and awareness, and it's interesting though in other cultures where they were not, it wasn't customary to ask questions to authority. So it's just interesting when you do think about culture. It's not necessarily it's right or wrong. It's just the way of being, and things do change. And so the more that we raise these the nuances and the differences, that over time, it's again, you can see patterns and you can see what fits best in certain cultures, and also how to perhaps think about things in considerations. So it's definitely interesting.
I know that there was a major crash, a collision, and that's exactly what happened, and exactly as you said it. And I remember reading about it. It was awful. There's this other aspect of speaking up too that is really critical. If I work with you and I say something to you that's a problem, or vice versa, if I don't speak up or you don't speak up, you might keep it to yourself, but you're still going to bear some level of resentment or distrust because I said it. It could be something that one of us didn't realize was offensive to the other, or it could be something that was misheard or misinterpreted. And if you don't speak up, though, the distrust continues, and it still affects the relationship, even though it wasn't, quote, that serious. So one of the things we're urging people to do is to speak up and work things out in a work-a-day manner, saying, hey, Rachel, I've got to talk to you about something. Now, certain things you can't do that with. We don't even need to get into that, but certain things, you said something to me, I just want to talk to you about it, could tell you what I thought, and can we work it out? And you might say, I never realized that, or no, Steve, that's not what I was saying. I said this. Oh, sorry. And it should be as quick as that. It should be that way with the culture. That's not easy. It's aspirational. It's not easy, but it's critical.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen, this has been such, I've had such a pleasure in chatting with you today. And what would you, or is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with, any considerations on your end?
First, thank you for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation with you and your members. I think the issue is, how do you take something that is aspirational, tied to your values, and convert it so it becomes day-to-day, just the way we do things? Every organization has things that are just the way we do things or don't, and there need to be behavioral principles dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion, and civility, and welcoming environment, and respect, all linked together through this is just the way we do things because who we are. That's the next learning challenge tied to behavior that I think all of us need to be focusing on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. And for those of you that would like to learn more about what about some of the solutions that they offer around diversity, civil rights, amongst other learning programs, Stephen, what would be the best way for someone to follow up with you?
I suggest that they take a look at our website, www.elinc.com, and contact us. And we have a team that would be delighted to answer questions and show our experience and content and who we've worked with and explain our best practices. But that's www.elinc.com.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. And have a great rest of the day, and thank you all for listening in to us. Stay healthy, productive, happy, and all good things for the year to come. Or oh my, where are we? We're almost into October, right? So it's it's been an amazing whirlwind of change. So let's embrace what's next, and hopefully it's all positive. So thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for joining us. And that's a wrap for today.